What would you do if you were told you didn't belong right there in front of everyone simply because of the color of your skin? Would you move quietly to avoid the scene, or would you stay, knowing your silence would mean surrender? On a calm morning flight, a black CEO took his rightful VIP seat paid for, earned, and confirmed. Moments later, a flight attendant leaned in and said, "Sir, this seat is reserved for someone else." That someone else was a white passenger who looked the part. In that instant, humiliation met power. But instead of anger, the CEO made one quiet call and the world stopped to listen. Because sometimes dignity doesn't roar, it whispers, it waits, then it transforms everything. If you've ever been judged, dismissed, or told you didn't belong, this story will remind you respect isn't requested, it's reclaimed. Stay with us as we unfold. Black CEO kicked out of VIP seat for white passenger froze when he fired them all instantly. If this story moves something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this one is more than just a story. It's a mirror. The boardroom was made of glass and silence. Every reflection showed the same thing: pale faces frozen in disbelief. It was 9:07 in Midtown Manhattan, 30 floors above the noise of the city, and not even the hum of traffic could drown out the words that had just been spoken. Marcus Ellington stood at the head of the long mahogany table. His gray suit was pressed but simple, his voice calm, yet carrying an unmistakable finality. He looked each of the 12 executives in the eyes, pausing just long enough for the truth to sink in. "My name," he said, "is Marcus Ellington. As of this morning, I am the majority owner of Skybridge Airlines." A sharp intake of breath rippled across the room. One man's pen clattered to the floor. Another whispered, "That can't be right." Marcus didn't flinch. He let the weight of the moment settle. His tone even neither angry nor triumphant, simply factual, as if he were reading a weather report. And as of this moment, he continued, "You're all relieved of your duties. No shouting, no drama, just quiet, irrevocable power." His words hung in the air like the echo of thunder after lightning soft, delayed, but impossible to ignore. Charles Morton, the outgoing CEO of Skybridge, blinked rapidly, trying to understand what was happening. "Excuse me," he stammered. "Mr. Ellington, this must be some kind of mistake. You can't just—" Marcus held up a single hand. "I can, and I have. You'll find all the legal documents in your inboxes." He turned toward the window. Outside, the city stretched wide and relentless, sunlight spilling across steel towers. To anyone watching from below, this would have looked like an ordinary Tuesday morning. But inside that glass box, an empire had just changed hands. Charles finally found his voice. "You bought the airline." How Marcus turned back, his expression unreadable. 3 days ago, someone at the far end of the table muttered, "3 days. That's impossible." Marcus's gaze didn't waver. Nothing's impossible when you've been underestimated long enough. The silence returned heavy, uncomfortable, and alive. Across the room, the company's general counsel, a woman named Linda Paxton, scrolled through her phone. Her fingers trembled as she read the official transaction notice from the SEC. Her voice was barely audible. "It's true. He owns 52%. Another voice, deeper and nervous, asked, "But why would you even?" Marcus's eyes softened. But his tone didn't, because 72 hours ago, One of your flight attendants decided that I didn't belong in first class." The room froze. He stepped closer to the table, his hand brushing the polished surface. "Because your staff decided that a black man in a hoodie must have bought the wrong seat. Because your security decided that removing me was easier than admitting bias." A few executives shifted in their seats. Charles tried again. "Ellington, if something inappropriate happened, we can investigate. There are procedures." Marcus's voice cut through the air like glass. "You had your procedures. I had mine." He looked around the room, not with vengeance, but with a clarity that came from pain processed long ago. "You see, when you've lived enough years being told you don't belong, you learn two things. One, silence is expensive. Two, power is cheaper when no one expects you to have it." No one spoke, no one moved. Somewhere down the hall, a copier clicked, the sound oddly distant and mechanical, as if it belonged to another world. Marcus took a slow breath, walking toward the large digital screen at the front of the room. With one tap, a video began to play. It showed an airplane cabin. Passengers craned their necks. A man in jeans and a dark hoodie stood calmly as a flight attendant argued with him. "Sir, please move to 17B. We have a premium passenger who needs this seat." "I paid for this seat," the man replied evenly. "We can sort it out after takeoff, but we need you to cooperate." A guard appeared in the frame. The man stood silent, then picked up his bag and walked toward the back of the plane. The clip ended there. Marcus turned off the screen. "That was 72 hours ago," he said quietly. "That was me." The room was suffocating now. No one dared to meet his eyes. He continued, his tone low but measured. "I recorded it not out of anger, but clarity. I wanted to remember what it feels like to be small again, because it's easy to forget that kind of pain when success starts to protect you." Charles exhaled heavily, his voice barely steady. "Mr. Ellington, Marcus, surely there's a way to what Marcus asked, to unfeel what millions of passengers feel every day, to rewrite a culture that chooses comfort over conscience." No one answered. He turned back toward the window, hands in his pockets. His reflection stared back a man who had built an empire from scratch, who had coded his first software in a rented basement, who had been laughed at, ignored, doubted, and still risen above it. "You know what the funny part is?" he said quietly. "I wasn't even angry. Not at first. I just wanted to fly to New York for a meeting. But when they took my seat, they gave me something far more valuable than space. They gave me purpose." He faced them again, and this time there was warmth in his eyes. "So, no, I didn't come here for revenge. I came here for change. I came here to make sure no one ever loses their seat just because of who they are." The tension cracked, replaced by something else. Respect? Fear? Maybe both. "The way I see it," Marcus said, "power isn't about payback. It's about protection." He closed his folder, adjusted his cufflink, and took a step toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back once more. "You have 48 hours to cooperate with the transition team. After that, Skybridge will look very different." He paused, and that's a good thing. With that, Marcus Ellington, once humiliated passenger, now owner, walked out of the room. The automatic door closed behind him with a soft hiss, sealing the silence like a final line in a chapter no one expected to end. The remaining executives sat motionless. For the first time, they understood what real accountability looked like, not a press release, not a fine, but the quiet certainty of justice returning home. And somewhere down the corridor, Marcus exhaled, steady, calm, already thinking about what came next. Morning sunlight crept through the blinds of a quiet house overlooking Lake Washington. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee and cedar wood. Marcus Ellington stood by the window, hands resting on the counter, eyes tracing the slow movement of a ferry in the distance. He liked mornings like this, quiet, balanced, honest, no boardrooms, no investors, just the hum of life outside and the slow rhythm of breath that reminded him he was still human beneath all the titles. He wasn't just a CEO to those who knew him well. He was a single father, a man who'd spent years learning how to rebuild a home after losing his wife to cancer. There was always a photo on the kitchen wall, him and his daughter Naomi at the science fair, holding a cardboard rocket. The caption read, "Dreams don't expire, they evolve." He poured himself a cup of black coffee and checked his watch, 5:42 a.m. He was supposed to be on a flight to New York in 3 hours. Skybridge Airlines. Flight 107 first class, seat 1C. It wasn't luxury to him. It was simply time to work, to think, to breathe before facing another day of decisions. The phone buzzed. Caleb Owens, his CFO, had sent a message. "Good luck today. IPO prep meeting confirmed for tomorrow. We're almost there." Marcus smiled faintly. "Almost there," he repeated under his breath. The phrase sounded heavy lately. After 20 years of climbing, building, leading, he sometimes wondered where exactly was there. He walked down the hallway, passing Naomi's closed door. She was 15 now, asleep, earbuds still in from her late-night playlist. He didn't wake her. Instead, he slipped a small note under her door, "Be kind today. The world needs it." He always left her small reminders like that, tiny anchors of compassion in a world that could be unkind. By 6, he was dressed simply dark jeans, a navy hoodie, and a gray blazer thrown over his arm. He hated drawing attention to himself. The hoodie was his comfort armor, a reminder that beneath the suits and speeches, he was still the same kid who once wrote code in a rented basement, sleeping beside old routers and cheap pizza boxes. He locked the door and stepped into the crisp Seattle air. The sky was pale blue, streaked with morning clouds. He breathed in deeply, then got into his black electric SUV. The navigation spoke softly. Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. 27 minutes. As he drove, the radio played faintly local news about corporate diversity initiatives, rising stock prices, the promise of progress. Marcus couldn't help but think how slow that progress always seemed when you lived inside the problem. He parked near Terminal B, grabbed his carry-on, and walked toward the check-in area. The crowd was already forming business travelers in tailored suits, families juggling luggage, tired red-eye passengers clinging to coffee cups. He joined the line for priority check-in. Ahead of him stood a woman cradling a child. Behind him, a man tapping impatiently at his phone. The usual travel symphony, polite smiles, rolling suitcases, the automated next passenger, please. When his turn came, he stepped up to the counter. The Skybridge agent, a young woman named Tanya Smith, glanced up from her monitor. Her expression was neutral at first until her eyes scanned him, then flicked back to the screen. Something subtle shifted in her tone. "Good morning, sir," she said, polite but reserved. "Can I see your ID?" He handed it over without hesitation. Of course. Marcus Ellington, Flight 107 to New York. Her nails clicked on the keyboard. The computer beeped once, then twice. She frowned slightly. It says there's a payment verification issue with this ticket. Marcus tilted his head. That's odd. The ticket was purchased weeks ago. Yes, sir. But sometimes corporate cards flag these kinds of bookings, Tanya replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Do you have another form of ID? I just gave you one. The people behind him shifted, annoyed. Marcus could feel the small weight of their eyes. The air changed the subtle tension of someone being questioned in a space where no one else was. He stayed calm, voice measured. Is there a specific problem? Tanya glanced at the passenger behind him. A tall white man in a crisp blue suit with a Skybridge loyalty pin on his lapel. Mr. Brooks? I can check you in now while we resolve this other issue, she said, skipping Marcus completely. William Brooks smiled warmly. Appreciate that. Tanya, always great service here. Marcus felt something cold rise in his chest. Not anger, yet just the quiet realization that it was happening again. That moment when courtesy splits into bias and professionalism becomes selective. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just looked at Tanya and said softly, I hope you realize what that looks like. She hesitated. Sir, I'm just following procedure. Are you sure it's not perception? Her cheeks reddened. I'll get a supervisor. Marcus stepped aside, watching William Brooks breeze through the counter. The contrast was obvious to everyone, but no one said a word. That was always how it worked. Prejudice didn't shout. It whispered. When the supervisor arrived, a man named Dean Harrison. He scanned Marcus's ticket and nodded quickly. Everything's fine. The system just glitched. Marcus gave a polite nod. Happens all the time, doesn't it? Dean avoided his eyes. Enjoy your flight, sir. Marcus took his boarding pass back and walked toward security. He didn't feel triumphant, just tired. The kind of tired that came from seeing the same movie replayed under different lighting. At security, a TSA officer smiled and waved him through. Hey, Mr. Ellington, big fan of your company's scholarships, the man said. Marcus's eyes softened. Thank you, he replied. That small recognition, the rare kind that wasn't filtered through suspicion, was enough to ease the weight, even for a moment. By the time he reached the gate, boarding had already begun. Gate B4 was busy, the usual chaos of announcements and shuffling passengers. Marcus took a seat by the window, phone buzzing with reminders. He scrolled briefly through headlines, tech conferences, education grants, another story about workplace bias trending on social media. He sighed quietly. A flight attendant passed by, cheerful and hurried. We'll begin pre-boarding soon for our first-class passengers, she said. Marcus smiled, holding up his pass. That's me. She smiled back. We'll make sure you're comfortable, sir. Her kindness was small, but it mattered. People often underestimated how much small gestures could balance a world full of small harms. When the call came, he boarded early. The first-class cabin glowed in warm light cream leather seats, soft jazz playing overhead. Seat 1C waited by the window. He placed his bag in the overhead bin, settled into the seat, and exhaled deeply. The hum of the engines was soothing. He took out his notebook and began sketching an idea for a new program, something for young coders in underrepresented communities. His pen moved in quiet circles. He didn't notice William Brooks entering until he heard that same smooth voice again. "Excuse me. I think you're in my seat." Marcus looked up, meeting his eyes. "No, I'm in 1C. Brooks frowned, glancing toward the attendant at the front. There must be a mistake. And for a brief second, Marcus almost laughed at the irony. Of all the planes, all the seats in the sky, it had to be this one. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. He simply folded his hands, calm, observant the stillness before a storm that would change everything. He leaned back, eyes closing, and whispered under his breath, "Let's see what kind of flight this becomes." The aircraft hummed with quiet luxury. Polished surfaces reflected the amber cabin lights, the faint smell of citrus and leather filling the air. Marcus Ellington placed his notebook into the seat pocket and fastened his belt. He always liked the calm before takeoff, those few minutes where time seemed to pause between ground and sky. But this morning, something in the air already felt tense, like a wire pulled too tight. A flight attendant named Rachel Denvers stood at the front of the cabin, scanning boarding passes on her tablet. Her movements were efficient, rehearsed. When she reached Marcus's row, her smile flickered for half a second before returning. "Good morning, sir," she said. "May I check your ticket again?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, polite but curious. "Of course." He handed it to her. She studied it, her lips tightening almost imperceptibly. This seat appears to be assigned to another passenger." "I believe that's a system error," Marcus replied evenly. It was confirmed at the gate. Before Rachel could respond, a deep voice came from behind her. "Excuse me," said William Brooks, adjusting the cuffs of his blue suit. "That's actually my seat, 1C." Rachel turned quickly toward him, relief washing over her face like she'd found the answer she wanted. "Yes, Mr. Brooks, one moment, please." Then she faced Marcus again. "Sir, if you wouldn't mind, could you let us resolve this? Maybe step aside while we check Marcus didn't move? I'd rather not. I've already settled in." Rachel's professional smile grew tight around the edges. "Sir, please, we just need to verify. It'll take a minute." He leaned back slightly, voice calm. "I understand. But unless you find another policy that allows you to reassign a confirmed first-class seat mid-boarding, I'll stay right here." A few passengers turned to look. Someone in 2A whispered. A woman in 1D frowned as if she could sense where this was heading. The air between them thickened, not loud, not chaotic, just quietly uncomfortable. Rachel shifted her weight, lowering her voice. "Sir, please don't make this difficult." Marcus looked at her. "Steady. I'm not the one making it difficult." At that moment, another attendant, a younger woman named Ellie, approached, holding a tablet. "Rachel," she said softly, "the system shows 1C under Mr. Ellington's name. It's cleared." Rachel frowned, tapping the screen. "That can't be right. Mr. Brooks is Platinum Elite. He always books 1C. Ellie hesitated, glancing between them. "It's definitely his seat." William Brooks gave a half laugh, the kind of laugh that didn't sound like humor. "Well, maybe he used points wrong or something." Marcus said nothing. He could feel the unspoken assumptions floating in the space between them. Status, worth, belonging. The same silent metrics that had followed him through every boardroom, every elevator, every moment he'd had to prove he deserved to be exactly where he stood. Rachel gestured toward the aisle. "Sir, I'm going to ask you again to move. There's an available seat in 17B, and we'll sort this out later." Marcus's voice didn't rise. It dropped, low and steady. "Ms. Denvers, I paid for this seat. I'm sitting in the correct place. You're asking me to move because it's easier to question me than to question your system." Rachel's jaw tightened. "Security will have to get involved if you refuse." The cabin went silent. Even the jazz stopped playing as if the music itself didn't want to intrude. "From the back," Ellie whispered. "Rachel. Maybe we should double-check first." But Rachel had already pressed the intercom button. "Captain, we need assistance in the first-class cabin." Within minutes, a uniformed security officer entered. Calm, but authoritative. "What seems to be the issue here?" Rachel pointed. "This gentleman refuses to move from a seat that's not his." The officer turned to Marcus. Sir Marcus met his gaze. "The ticket and ID are in order. The error isn't mine." The officer took both documents, scanned them on his device, and frowned. "Everything checks out. Ms. Denvers." Rachel blinked. "That's strange. There must have been a system duplication." The officer handed the documents back to Marcus and gave a small nod. "You're fine to stay seated, sir." Marcus thanked him quietly. He thought that would be the end of it, but then William Brooks leaned closer, voice dripping with condescension. "You know, some of us actually pay full fare for these seats." Marcus turned his head slowly. "And some of us build the companies that design the software keeping your bank's servers online." Brooks blinked, color draining slightly from his face. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. The nearby passengers fell utterly silent. Rachel's professional tone returned, brittle and cold. "Fine. Enjoy your flight, Mr. Ellington." She turned sharply and walked toward the galley, whispering something to Ellie as she passed. Ellie's eyes flickered toward Marcus with something like apology. The plane door closed. The safety briefing began. Marcus stared out the window, jaw set, watching the tarmac lights flicker. His heartbeat was calm, but his thoughts churned. He had learned long ago to separate emotion from action, to store the hurt somewhere private, somewhere it could grow into strategy. The engines roared to life. The plane began to move. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, letting the vibration of the takeoff steady his thoughts. Half an hour into the flight, Rachel reappeared, placing a drink on his tray. "Complimentary wine," she said curtly. "No, thank you." She lingered a moment. "You know, most people would have just switched seats and avoided the scene." Marcus's eyes met hers. "Most people don't pay for lessons in humility disguised as customer service." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Excuse me, never mind." He looked back at the window. "Have a good flight." Rachel walked away, muttering something under her breath. Across the aisle, a woman with silver hair leaned forward. "Don't let it bother you, honey," she whispered. "Some people see color before they see character." Marcus smiled softly. "Thank you, ma'am. I've been flying this airline for 30 years, she continued. "They don't change unless someone makes them?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe it's time they do." The rest of the flight was quiet. Marcus spent the next hour answering emails, sketching notes in his journal, but under the calm surface, his mind was alive with precision calculating, remembering, connecting every thread that had led to this moment. By the time they began their descent into New York, he already knew what he would do. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he knew why. As the plane touched down, Rachel made the final announcement in her polished, indifferent voice. "Thank you for choosing Skybridge Airlines. We hope to see you again soon." Marcus unbuckled, collected his things, and waited for the aisle to clear. Brooks brushed past him without a glance. Rachel avoided eye contact entirely. When Marcus stepped off the plane, Ellie stood near the door, her voice low. "I'm sorry, sir, for everything." He paused, meeting her eyes. "You don't have to apologize for telling the truth." She looked down. "Sometimes truth gets people fired." He nodded gently. "Sometimes it gets people promoted." Then he walked into the terminal, calm, focused, and strangely certain. The humiliation still stung, but beneath it was something sharper, a quiet, fire-forming shape. He didn't know yet that within 3 days, that same airline would belong to him. But he did know this when dignity is taken. Justice eventually collects the debt. He slipped his hands into his pockets and whispered to himself, "They think this ends in the air. It doesn't. It starts here." The sharp chill of the New York morning met Marcus Ellington the moment he stepped out of the terminal. The city buzzed in its usual rhythm horns, shouts, footsteps colliding in a kind of urban symphony. Yet, inside his chest, everything was silent. He had walked off that flight with the composure of a man in control, but every echo of that humiliation still clung to him like a shadow he couldn't shake off. The smell of jet fuel and coffee mixed with the memory of Rachel Denver's voice, "Sir, please move to 17B. It replayed in his head like static. He hailed a cab. The driver, a middle-aged man with an accent Marcus couldn't quite place, looked back in the mirror. LaGuardia to Midtown. "Right. Yes," Marcus said softly, leaning back. His phone vibrated in his pocket, but he ignored it. He needed quiet, needed space to think. Outside the window, the skyline rose like a jagged wall of glass, each tower cutting through the gray sky. By the time the cab reached the Ellington Tech office on Madison Avenue, he had already buried the incident behind his usual calm. He paid the fare, stepped onto the curb, and straightened his blazer. Inside, the lobby buzzed with life screens flashing stock updates, employees greeting him with polite nods. They saw a leader, confident and grounded. None of them saw the storm beneath that still surface. Caleb Owens, his CFO, met him near the elevators. "Morning, boss." "How was the flight?" Marcus gave a noncommittal smile. "Uneventful." Caleb laughed, pressing the elevator button. "You're the only person I know who can cross the country and call it uneventful." Marcus didn't respond. Inside the elevator, his reflection looked distant. He had learned the art of masking discomfort long ago. Boardrooms didn't forgive emotion. But as the doors opened to the 27th floor, he exhaled slowly, as if releasing something heavy that had been sitting in his chest. The IPO meeting began an hour later. The conference room was full of charts, financial analysts, and talk of growth projections. Marcus sat through the presentations with quiet precision, his mind focused but detached. When his turn came to speak, he delivered his strategy clearly, no hesitation, no sign of distraction. Yet part of him was still on that plane, still standing in that aisle under 100 staring eyes. When the meeting ended, Layla Carter, his corporate attorney, lingered. "You all right?" she asked, her tone soft but direct. Marcus hesitated. "I will be. Something happened on the flight." He paused, weighing whether to share. Layla wasn't just his lawyer. She was one of the few people who had earned his trust over the years. "Let's just say," he murmured, "I was reminded that progress on paper isn't always progress in practice." Layla frowned slightly. "That bad enough that I'm still thinking about it. Then maybe it's worth doing something about it." Her words stayed with him long after she left. Doing something about it. He had built his company on solving problems others ignored. But this wasn't code or strategy. This was the invisible kind of battle, the kind you couldn't fix with logic alone. He walked to his office window, the city sprawling beneath him. The reflection of his own face stared back, measured, patient, but tired. His phone buzzed again. This time, he checked it. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Allington, this is Nora Alvarez. We met briefly on Flight 107. I'm writing an article on discrimination in the skies. I'd like to talk if you're open to it." He remembered her instantly, the journalist with the curious eyes sitting near the back of the plane. She had spoken to him briefly before landing, her tone empathetic but sharp. He hadn't expected to hear from her again. Marcus typed a reply. "Sure, coffee tomorrow morning. My office." That night, he tried to rest, but sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the smirk on Brooks's face, the hesitation in Rachel's eyes, the silence of the passengers who watched and did nothing. He turned in bed, staring at the city lights spilling through the blinds. Naomi's soft footsteps echoed down the hall. "Dad," she said sleepily, standing at the doorway, "you're still up?" He smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep?" She came closer, curling up beside him on the edge of the bed. "Big meeting." He shook his head. Something else, something that didn't sit right. She rested her chin on her knees. "You always say when something doesn't sit right, it's a sign to stand up." He chuckled quietly. "You listen too much. I listen just enough," she said, grinning before yawning. Marcus kissed her forehead. "Get some rest. Kiddo. Night. Dad." When she left, her words lingered. A sign to stand up. Maybe that was exactly what this was. Not an insult to Barry, but a mirror reflecting everything still wrong with the world he thought he'd outgrown. Morning arrived gray and misty. Nora Alvarez arrived at the office early, a notebook in hand, hair pulled back, eyes sharp. She looked around the glass-walled meeting room with quiet curiosity before Marcus entered. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, extending her hand. "Of course. You were on that flight, weren't you?" "I was," she replied, "and I saw what happened." Marcus sat across from her. Most people pretended they didn't. "That's what I'm writing about," she said softly. "The way silence protects bias." He leaned back, studying her. "So, what do you want from me?" "Your story," she said simply. "Not as a CEO, as a man who's experienced it. People read numbers, they forget faces. Stories remind them who gets hurt." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "If I tell it, I don't want pity, I want accountability." Nora nodded. "Then that's the story I'll tell." She asked questions not invasive, but thoughtful. What he felt when it happened, whether it was the first time, what he planned to do next. He didn't have answers yet, but as he spoke, he realized how the act of naming injustice out loud gave it less power over him. When the meeting ended, Nora stood. "If you ever decide to go beyond words, I'd like to help." Marcus smiled faintly. "Be careful what you offer." She returned the smile. "I always am." After she left, Marcus walked back to his desk. On the screen was the Skybridge Airlines homepage, its tagline shimmering beneath the company logo, bridging people, building trust. The irony almost made him laugh. He opened another window, typed in Skybridge Holdings investor data, and began to read. By noon, he had a folder filled with information ownership structures, debt ratios, recent lawsuits. He didn't yet know what he would do with it, but he knew that knowledge was the first step toward leverage, and leverage was power reshaped by purpose. That evening, Layla called. "You sound busy," she said. "Just reading about an airline I might know too well." She chuckled lightly. "Marcus, what are you planning?" "Nothing rash. Just curious how much a company loses when it forgets who its customers are." "Be careful," she warned. "Curiosity built empires but destroyed a few, too." He smiled. "Then I'll build mine differently." When the call ended, he closed the folder and leaned back. Through the window, the last light of day stretched across the skyline. He wasn't angry anymore. He was ready. The next morning unfolded in shades of soft gray, the kind of muted light that wrapped New York City in quiet before the noise returned. Marcus Ellington woke earlier than usual, not out of habit, but because his thoughts had refused to sleep. The incident on the plane had replayed in his mind so many times it had worn grooves into his memory. Yet underneath that unease, something was taking shape, an idea, sharp and deliberate, like the first sketch of a plan. By 7, he was already seated in the corner of Café Verity, a small coffee shop tucked between an antique bookstore and a florist. The place smelled of cinnamon and rain-soaked pavement. He chose a booth near the window where he could watch the city rush past without being pulled into its current. When Nora Alvarez walked in, she spotted him immediately and smiled a small, knowing smile that carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much of the world's unfairness, but still believed in change. "Mr. Ellington," she greeted warmly, extending her hand. "Please, Marcus," he replied. "You're early. Journalists don't sleep when a good story finds them." He chuckled softly. "Then let's make sure this one matters." They ordered coffee and talked quietly, the clinking of cups forming a steady rhythm beneath their words. Nora asked careful questions, not the kind that pry, but the kind that uncover truth layer by layer. She wanted to understand what had happened on Flight 107, but more importantly, why it mattered beyond one man's humiliation. "When people hear stories like this," she said, "they often ask why it's such a big deal. They don't see the pattern. They see an incident. But this isn't just about one bad employee. Is it Marcus stirred his coffee, eyes thoughtful? No. It's about how systems learn to look away. You can fire a person, but that doesn't change a culture built on quiet permission." Nora nodded, jotting notes in her leather-bound journal. "That's what I want people to see, the quiet permission. The look that says, 'You don't belong here.'" He leaned back, studying her for a moment. "You've been on that side before, haven't you? The one who didn't belong." Her smile thinned. "Once or twice. My father was a taxi driver. He used to tell me, 'There are two kinds of people in this world, the ones who open doors and the ones who hold them closed.' I decided to write about it instead of arguing." Marcus admired that. She wasn't bitter, she was determined. It was a quality he respected, maybe even needed. They talked for nearly 2 hours, weaving between the personal and the political, the intimate and the institutional. By the end, Nora had filled several pages of notes, and Marcus had agreed to one condition: he would share his story, but not as a victim, as a lesson, When they left the cafe, the city had come alive. Taxis honked, vendors shouted, and sunlight cut through the haze. As they parted, Nora said, "You know, stories like this don't just expose people, they move them." Marcus smiled faintly. Let's hope they move the right ones. Back in his office, he spent the afternoon reviewing Skybridge's corporate filings again. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he found it a string of unpaid settlements tied to discrimination complaints, quietly closed, quietly forgotten. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was a pattern, carefully buried. The company had been fined 3 times in 5 years, yet their public reputation remained spotless. He forwarded the documents to Layla with a short note. Find out how deep this goes. Her reply came an hour later. Deep and messy. They've paid to keep it that way. Marcus stared at the email for a long time before shutting his laptop. There was a strange calm settling over him now, the clarity that comes when anger cools into focus. That evening, as he walked home, his phone rang. It was Nora. "I just received something," she said quickly. "An anonymous source from Skybridge's HR department sent me internal memos training slides. To be exact, one of them includes language suggesting flight staff monitor passenger appearance consistency with ticket class." Marcus stopped walking. "You're saying they train employees to profile passengers?" "Not directly," Nora said, her tone heavy, "but the wording implies it. The slides use phrases like visual verification of passenger alignment and comfort-based cabin evaluation. It's coded language." He exhaled slowly. "Keep that file safe. That might be the thread that unravels everything." "I will." And Marcus. "Yes, I think this story's bigger than either of us thought." After hanging up, he stood on the corner of 47th and Lexington, watching the rush of pedestrians crossing the street. None of them knew that the calm man in the hoodie standing among them had just found the crack in a corporate wall that would soon crumble. The next morning, he called Caleb into his office. "How much liquid capital can we mobilize in 72 hours? Caleb blinked. "That depends. What are we buying?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Leverage?" Caleb frowned. "You're not serious." "I'm very serious. I want to know who owns Skybridge's debt. If I can't change them from the outside, I'll do it from the top." Caleb stared for a moment, then nodded. "You know, this could blow back. Everything worth doing does. By evening." Marcus had a list investment groups, shell companies, hedge funds, all interconnected, all holding small pieces of a giant machine too arrogant to believe it could fall apart. He didn't plan to destroy them. He planned to rebuild them, but to rebuild, he would first have to own. Later that night, he called Nora again. "How would you feel about joining me on something a little unconventional?" Her laugh was soft. "You mean something risky, something necessary?" There was a pause on the line. "What are you planning?" "Marcus, let's just say I'm going to teach Skybridge what real accountability feels like." When he hung up, the decision had already crystallized. The next few days would require precision, silence, and strategy. And as he sat by the window, the city lights shimmering below, he felt a strange sense of peace. He wasn't chasing revenge. He was pursuing balance. Naomi came into the room, holding her sketchbook. "Dad, you're thinking again," she teased. He smiled, taking the book from her hands. On the page was a drawing of a plane flying through clouds. She'd written above it Skybridge, but make it fair. Marcus laughed quietly, handing it back. "You might be on to something." She tilted her head. Are you going to fix something again? He looked at her, eyes soft, maybe. But this time, not with code, with consequences. That night, long after Naomi had gone to bed, Marcus drafted an email. It was short, polite, and directed to his investment advisor. Begin discreet acquisition of Skybridge equity. Do not disclose principal identity. Operate through Ellington Holdings DeSeca. He hit send. Then he closed his laptop and whispered into the quiet room. Let's build something worth belonging to. Outside, thunder rolled distantly over the city, soft and low, like a drumbeat announcing change. Rain tapped steadily against the tall windows of Marcus Ellington's office. The rhythm soft but insistent, like a reminder that time was moving even when he wasn't. The city below shimmered under a blur of reflections, lights bending through puddles that glowed like molten gold. He stood there for a long while, hands in his pockets, thinking about everything that had unfolded since that flight. It had only been a few days, yet the world around him felt altered, as if the air itself had grown heavier with meaning. His computer screen glowed faintly on the desk behind him. Dozens of documents were open financial reports, merger filings, investor lists. Each file represented a thread in the web that was Skybridge Airlines. What began as a moment of public humiliation had now become something much larger, a mission with a pulse of its own. Caleb Owens entered quietly, balancing 2 cups of coffee. "You've been up all night again," he said, setting one down. "If you keep this up, you'll outwork your own algorithms." Marcus smiled faintly. Maybe that's the point. Caleb took a seat opposite him, scanning the mess of documents on the desk. "So, tell me," he said, "what's next? You've had me trace half the equity structure of a Fortune 500 airline. You've got Layla digging through contracts. I assume there's a reason beyond curiosity." "There is," Marcus replied. "Skybridge's stock is undervalued because of their debt exposure. They're one bad quarter away from a liquidity crisis, and their main creditors don't even realize how unstable their holdings are." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about leverage trading. I'm talking about ownership," Marcus said quietly. "If I can acquire the right debt notes, I can gain control before anyone realizes what's happening." Caleb leaned back, whistling softly. "You want to buy the airline?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the window again, watching the rain. "I don't want to buy it. I want to transform it. But first, I have to own it." Layla Carter walked in just then, her umbrella dripping onto the marble floor. "You two sound like you're plotting a coup," she said dryly, hanging her coat. "Something like that," Caleb muttered. Layla crossed her arms. "Marcus, before we even entertain this, we need to talk logistics. This isn't a tech startup. You're talking about aviation, government oversight, federal transport regulations, the works." "I know," Marcus said, "but systems are systems, and systems, no matter how large, depend on the same thing in belief. If the market believes in a company, it lives. If not, it collapses." Layla sighed, though a small reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "You always did think like an engineer trying to debug society. Society runs on code too," Marcus replied. She sat down, flipping open her tablet. "All right, let's say you're serious. What's your timeline?" 72 hours. Caleb nearly spilled his coffee. "You can't be serious." "I am," Marcus said simply. "I've already set up Ellington Holdings to sue. The capital's there. We'll start quietly through secondary markets, then roll over into institutional buyouts. We'll use proxies. By the time the board realizes what's happening, it'll be too late." Layla's eyes narrowed. "And when they ask why a tech company CEO is buying an airline, I'll tell them the truth," Marcus said. "I'm investing in better infrastructure for fairness." Caleb smirked. "They'll love that." Marcus didn't respond. His eyes were distant, focused on something beyond the rain. They won't understand it at first, but they will. The three of them spent the next hours buried in logistics. Caleb mapped acquisition routes while Layla drafted legal shields. Marcus directed everything with quiet precision. He didn't shout or rush. He simply adjusted variables, corrected assumptions, recalibrated the plan like he was fine-tuning an algorithm. By late afternoon, the office was filled with papers, glowing screens, and half-drunk coffee cups. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Layla stood, stretching her back. "I'll handle the filings," she said. "But Marcus, this isn't just business. This is going to make noise. You'll be pulling power away from people who don't like losing it." "I'm not taking power," Marcus said softly. "I'm redistributing it." Caleb looked up from his laptop. "What if this backfires?" Marcus gave a quiet smile. "Then, at least we'll know the system we challenged was too fragile to stand." That evening, after they'd all left, Marcus remained in the office alone. The city had gone dark, except for the streaks of light glinting off the wet streets. He opened his notebook and wrote a single line across the top of a page: "Dignity has a cost. Pay it forward." His phone vibrated a message from Nora. "Check your email. You're going to want to see this." He opened his inbox to find a folder labeled Skybridge, Internal Comms. Inside were several leaked memos. The language was bureaucratic, but the meaning clear. One line read, "Maintain cabin image consistency for premium passengers. Address visual irregularities discreetly." He exhaled slowly. There it was, the proof of what he had felt in his bones that day on the plane. It wasn't a mistake. It was a protocol disguised as policy. He typed back, "Keep your source protected. This will matter later." Her reply came almost immediately. "You're not planning to go public yet, are you?" "Not yet," he wrote. "First, I need control." Later that night, he drove home in silence, the hum of the car blending with the rhythm of rain. Naomi was waiting on the couch, curled under a blanket, a bowl of popcorn beside her. The television flickered softly with an old science documentary they used to watch together. "You're late," she said, eyes still on the screen. "I know." He smiled faintly, sitting beside her. She handed him a handful of popcorn. "You're thinking too much again." He laughed quietly. "You sound like Caleb. I sound like someone who knows you don't sleep when you're building something." He looked at her, amused. "You really think I'm building something I don't think? I know. You always build when something breaks." He paused, the words sinking in deeper than she realized. "Maybe you're right," he said softly. "Maybe this time. It's not just about building, it's about fixing what shouldn't have broken in the first place." Naomi leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then make it better. Dad, just don't forget to be kind while you do it." He smiled. "I'll try." When she fell asleep, he carried her to her room and stood for a long moment in the doorway, watching her breathe. The world outside felt harsh, impatient, divided, but in that small room, everything still made sense. He returned to his desk, opened his laptop, and watched as the first confirmation emails began to roll in: purchase executed, 4.3% acquired, 5.7% pending transfer. The numbers climbed slowly through the night. By dawn, he had quietly secured over 12% of Skybridge Airlines. He leaned back, exhausted but steady, watching the sunrise paint gold streaks across the skyline. This was no longer about a seat or a flight or an apology that would never come. It was about the principle that no one should ever have to earn their right to belong. And as the first rays of morning light filled the room, Marcus Ellington whispered to himself, "Let's finish what they started when they told me to move." The morning broke clear and cold, sunlight spilling through the office blinds in long, golden lines. Marcus Ellington sat at his desk, sleeves rolled up, the faint hum of the city outside serving as his background music. The quiet was deceptive. Beneath it, the rhythm of movement was quickening. Notifications blinked across his laptop screen, transactions confirmed, shares transferred, accounts validated. Each message was a piece of the mosaic he had begun assembling in silence. By 8 Caleb Owens arrived, carrying a fresh pot of coffee and a face full of disbelief. "You really did it," he said, setting the pot down. "You actually pulled off 12% in 48 hours. That's unheard of." Marcus didn't look up. Not impossible, just precise. Caleb shook his head, half amused, half in awe. "You make it sound like we're rearranging code, not buying a multi-billion-dollar airline." Marcus smiled faintly. "Systems, Caleb, they all follow rules. You just have to know where the loopholes hide." Layla Carter entered a few minutes later, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. "I just got off a call with our legal analysts," she said. "Skybridge's board has no idea yet, but they're starting to sense market movement. Their investor relations team sent out an alert about unusual trading activity. We've got maybe 36 hours before someone connects the dots." "That's all I need," Marcus replied calmly. Layla raised an eyebrow. "To do what you've already shocked me enough for 1 week." He looked up at her, eyes sharp but calm. "To take control before they even realize it." Layla crossed her arms. "And what exactly do you plan to do once you have control for a moment?" Marcus didn't answer. He turned his gaze to the city skyline, watching sunlight glint off the glass towers. "I plan to make them face the mirror they've been avoiding for years." Caleb gave a low whistle. "You're not just buying them, you're about to remake them." Marcus didn't deny it. As the day unfolded, his office turned into a quiet storm of activity. Phones rang softly, documents printed, signed, scanned. The sound of progress was steady and deliberate. Outside, life moved as usual: meetings, lunches, traffic, but inside, Marcus and his team were rewriting a part of corporate history that had long been untouchable. By mid-afternoon, Nora Alvarez arrived at the office carrying a folder marked "Confidential." She looked different today, focused, fierce, her journalist's composure mixed with something personal. "I brought something," she said, placing the folder on Marcus's desk. He gestured for her to sit. "What am I looking at? Employee testimonies," she said. "Whistleblowers, 4 of them, flight attendants, gate agents, even a pilot. They talk about internal pressure to screen passenger image consistency. Some were told their bonuses depended on cabin presentation metrics." Caleb exhaled. "That's corporate code for profiling." Nora nodded grimly. "It's systemic. And worse, they've been paying settlements quietly through shell accounts labeled as operational incidents. I've traced 6 so far. Marcus flipped through the pages. Each one told a story, and each story was familiar people singled out, humiliated, dismissed all for the comfort of others. He looked up, voice low. "How solid is this rock solid?" Nora said. "If this goes public, Skybridge will crumble." Layla spoke up. "If we release it now, yes, but that's not Marcus's goal." Nora frowned. "Then what is his goal?" Marcus closed the folder and leaned forward. "To fix the rot, not burn the house down. If I buy them and then reveal this, I can rebuild the structure from inside with accountability, transparency, reform. Otherwise, someone else just buys the pieces and repeats the same behavior." Nora studied him for a moment. "You really believe a corporation can have a conscience?" He smiled faintly. "Only if someone's willing to write one into its code." She leaned back, visibly moved. "You sound less like a CEO and more like an architect." "I've always been both," he said softly. That evening, the 4 of them, Marcus, Caleb, Layla, and Nora, sat together around the conference table, a rare moment of silence binding them. The city beyond the glass walls flickered like a heartbeat. Layla broke the quiet first. "We've got about 24 hours before Skybridge realizes who's behind the acquisitions. When they do, they'll fight back legally, politically, publicly," Caleb added. "They'll probably go to the press before you do, try to paint you as a hostile investor." Nora looked at Marcus. "If that happens, I can counter it, but you'll need to be ready to speak." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then I'll speak." He stood, walking to the window. Below, the streets moved in slow, glittering lines of traffic. He thought about that morning on the plane, how quickly respect could evaporate when assumptions took over. He thought of Rachel Denver's voice, of Brooks's smirk, of Naomi's quiet faith that he would fix what was broken. "You know," he said, turning back to them, "I used to think progress was a straight line. Effort equals reward. Logic equals fairness. But that's not how the world works. Some people start miles ahead, and others have to run through storms just to get to the starting line." Nora whispered. "Then what makes you keep running?" He smiled faintly. "Because if I stop, the storm wins." Layla's phone buzzed suddenly. She checked the screen and froze. "It's starting," she said. "Skybridge just held an emergency board meeting. They're investigating strategic acquisitions of unknown origin." Caleb grinned. "You got their attention." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Good. It's time they pay attention to something real." The next morning came like the calm before a storm. Marcus walked into the office early, dressed in his usual gray suit, expression composed. The monitors were already flashing financial analysts discussing the sudden surge in Skybridge shares, reporters speculating about possible mergers. He ignored the noise. At exactly 9:15 a.m., Layla entered. "We hit 21%. That's controlling minority." "Keep going," Marcus said. "Aim for 35 by tonight." Caleb looked up from his laptop. "You know, once we cross 30, you'll trigger disclosure laws. The board will know it's you." Marcus smiled. "Then I'll stop hiding." By noon, news alerts were everywhere. Anonymous investor acquiring Skybridge shares. Rapidly insider speculation points to tech tycoon. His phone buzzed nonstop, but he ignored every call. The time for talking was nearly over. At 5:00 p.m., he received a call from an unknown number. He answered. A stern voice said, "Mr. Ellington, this is David Langford. chairman of Skybridge Airlines. I think we should talk." Marcus's tone was calm. "I agree. Tomorrow morning, your headquarters." There was a pause. "You understand this could get unpleasant. I'm counting on it." He hung up, placing the phone down carefully. Then he turned to Caleb and Layla. "Tomorrow, we walk in through the front door." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "And what happens when they realize the man they threw out of first class now owns their company?" Marcus's eyes darkened slightly, not with anger, but with conviction. Then they'll learn the difference between humiliation and accountability. That night, he walked home under a cold wind. The city lights glowed through the drizzle, and for the first time in days, he felt something close to peace. Not the peace of victory, but the peace of purpose. At home. Naomi sat cross-legged on the couch, sketching again. This time, it was a drawing of a plane with a new logo, one shaped like an open bridge. "Looks familiar," he said, smiling. "It's yours," she said simply, "because bridges are meant to hold people, not push them off." Marcus felt his chest tighten with quiet pride. "You always know the right thing to say." She grinned. "That's because I listen." And as she handed him the drawing, he realized this wasn't just his fight anymore. It was everyone's who had ever been told they didn't belong. Everyone who'd ever been moved out of a seat they'd earned. Tomorrow, he would walk into Skybridge's headquarters not as a passenger, but as its owner, and this time, no one would tell him to move. The morning of the meeting dawned sharp and clear, the kind of New York day that carried a nervous electricity through the air. Marcus Ellington stood in front of the mirror as he adjusted his tie. The reflection looking back at him was composed, calm, but behind the stillness was a storm of purpose. Today wasn't about revenge, it was about reckoning. The difference mattered to him. Revenge was small. Reckoning was structural. Naomi peeked into his room, still in her pajamas, holding her drawing of the plane with the open bridge logo. "Are you going to that big meeting you talked about?" she asked. He nodded, smiling softly. "Yes, the biggest one yet." She tilted her head. "Are you going to fix it? I'm going to try," he said. "Then you'll do it," she replied with the matter-of-fact confidence only children possessed. He laughed quietly, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Wish me courage." "Always," she said, handing him the drawing. "For luck?" By the time Marcus's car pulled up to Skybridge Airlines headquarters, a sleek glass building on the edge of downtown, the city was already buzzing with whispers. Reporters waited outside, murmuring theories into their microphones. Some said he was there to negotiate a merger. Others said it was a takeover. None of them knew the truth that he had come to face the same institution that once told him he didn't belong in their first-class cabin. Inside, the building was immaculate cold marble, chrome elevators, and portraits of past executives lining the hallway. Security guards in navy blazers guided Marcus and his team toward the boardroom on the top floor. Layla Carter walked beside him, calm but alert, while Caleb Owens followed, clutching a tablet filled with figures and acquisition papers. As they entered the boardroom, a dozen faces turned toward them. David Langford, the chairman, stood at the head of the table. His silver hair gleamed under the recessed lighting, his posture regal, his smile thin. "Mr. Ellington," Langford said, "quite the surprise to have you here in person. We didn't expect the man behind Ellington Holdings to be, well, you." Marcus extended a hand. "Good morning, Mr. Langford. I thought introductions were overdue." Langford ignored the hand, gesturing toward the empty seat across from him. "Please, sit. We have a lot to discuss." Marcus sat down slowly, unbothered. Layla and Caleb flanked him like quiet pillars of resolve. One of the board members, a woman named Susan Caldwell, leaned forward. "Let's get straight to it. Shall we? You've acquired over 33% of Skybridge stock in under a week. That's an aggressive move by any standard. What exactly are your intentions?" Marcus met her gaze evenly. "To reform the company from within. Not dismantle it, revive it." Langford gave a low chuckle. "Revive it. That's a poetic way to describe a hostile takeover." "This isn't hostile," Marcus said softly. "Hostility is what I experienced in one of your first-class cabins not long ago. This is correction." A murmur rippled through the room. Langford's expression tightened. "I assume you're referring to that alleged incident the press has been whispering about." "There's nothing alleged about it," Marcus replied. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Your staff profiled me, humiliated me in front of other passengers, and attempted to remove me from a seat I paid for. The system you've built allowed that to happen not by accident, but by design." Langford's tone hardened. "Mr. Ellington, Skybridge serves over 40 million passengers a year. We can't control every minor misunderstanding that occurs on a flight." Layla leaned forward, sliding a folder across the table. "Then you'll want to read this. These are internal training documents your company distributed. They include phrases like visual alignment with cabin standards. You might call them misunderstandings, but the law calls them systemic discrimination." Langford hesitated for a fraction of a second before regaining his composure. "Those documents are taken out of context." "Context," Marcus repeated quietly, "is exactly the problem. The context you built allows people like me to be questioned before we're even greeted. I didn't come here for an apology. I came to ensure this never happens again to anyone." Another board member spoke, voice cautious. "And you believe you can do that by taking over a legacy company like Skybridge? I don't just believe it," Marcus said. "I'm already doing it." Caleb tapped his tablet, and the large screen on the wall flickered to life. Charts and graphs appeared, ownership breakdowns, financial forecasts, restructuring plans. "As of 8:00 router this morning," Caleb said, "Ellington Holdings the Secu holds 37.6% of Skybridge equity. Add in the shares pledged by our strategic partners, and that number exceeds 51%. Gasps filled the room. Langford's eyes widened slightly. "That's impossible." Marcus leaned forward, folding his hands. "It's math." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Langford spoke again, his voice quieter, tinged with something almost like disbelief. "So what now?" "You plan to fire us all?" Marcus considered the question. "No. Only those who built their careers on bias and silence. The rest we rebuild together." Susan Caldwell frowned. "You're talking about rewriting decades of corporate culture overnight." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then it's long overdue." Langford pushed back his chair. Standing, "You can't just waltz in here and claim moral superiority. Mr. Ellington, you're a tech CEO, not a social engineer. You don't understand the complexities of this industry." Marcus rose too, matching his height but not his tone. "I understand what happens when industries forget their humanity." He looked around the room, meeting every gaze. "You built bridges for commerce, not people. I intend to fix that. For a moment, the tension in the room was palpable. Then Langford exhaled sharply and turned toward the window. So, this is your grand vision. To turn an airline into a moral crusade, Marcus's voice was steady. To turn it into a mirror, one that reflects who we are and who we choose to become. Langford turned back, eyes cold. You'll fail. Marcus smiled faintly. Then I'll fail forward. The room fell silent again, save for the quiet hum of the city outside. Layla watched him with quiet pride. Caleb looked relieved, as though the weight of months had just shifted. Langford finally spoke again. Voice clipped, "If you're truly in control, then let's see how you handle it. You'll have your board meeting, your announcements, your headlines. But remember, an airline isn't built on ideals, it's built on profit." Marcus looked him dead in the eye. "Then let's make fairness profitable." As they left the building, the cameras waiting outside exploded in flashes. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Ellington, is it true you now control Skybridge Airlines? Are you seeking retribution? What will happen to the current leadership?" Marcus paused at the top of the steps, sunlight catching his face. "I'm not here for retribution," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I'm here for reform. For everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong, this is your seat now, and it's not going anywhere." The crowd erupted in questions, but he didn't linger. He turned and walked toward the car, calm and certain. Layla and Caleb beside him. In the reflection of the glass doors, he caught a glimpse of his own face, not triumphant, but resolute. That evening, Nora called him. Her voice was bright with disbelief. "You really did it. You actually bought them." He smiled quietly. "We bought accountability. Ownership was just the method." "What happens next?" she asked. Marcus glanced at Naomi's drawing propped on his desk. "Now," he said softly, "we rebuild the bridge." The storm came quickly. By the next morning, every major news network had plastered Marcus Ellington's face across their screens. Headlines flashed in bold: "Tech mogul takes over Skybridge Airlines." "Corporate hero or overreaching CEO Marcus Ellington's reckoning flight." The internet was a frenzy of opinions, half applauding his courage, half calling it a stunt for attention. But none of that mattered to Marcus. He had expected resistance. The difference was, this time, he was ready. In the quiet of his apartment, he sat at the breakfast table with Naomi. The morning light fell across her sketchbook as she drew new versions of her open bridge logo. He sipped his coffee in silence, letting the hum of the city below filter through the windows. Naomi finally looked up. "Dad, why are people saying mean things about you online?" He set his cup down, because some people are afraid of change, and fear makes them say things they don't understand. "Will they stop?" she asked softly. He smiled gently. "Eventually, when they see that what we're building is better." She nodded, then returned to her drawing. "You'll make them see." Her faith steadied him more than she could ever know. Later that morning, Marcus arrived at Skybridge headquarters for the emergency shareholder meeting. The lobby was crowded with reporters again, their cameras flashing like lightning. He ignored the noise and walked through with quiet composure. Upstairs, the boardroom was tense. David Langford was already there, flanked by legal advisors. Susan Caldwell sat near the end of the table, arms folded, watching him closely. Langford wasted no time. "You've caused quite a media circus. Mr. Ellington, our investors are panicking. Stock volatility is through the roof." Marcus set down his briefcase and met Langford's glare. "Markets adjust, cultures change slower, but one must come before the other. Spare us the philosophy." Langford snapped. "You've humiliated this company. Do you realize how many clients are threatening to pull their contracts?" Layla Carter, seated beside Marcus, answered before he could. "What they're threatening to pull are contracts built on a facade of fairness. If they're leaving, it's because the mirror finally showed them something they didn't like." Langford's face flushed. "You're turning this company into a political platform." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "No, I'm turning it into a moral one. There's a difference." Susan Caldwell interjected calmly. "What exactly do you propose?" "Marcus, you've taken control, but you haven't outlined your vision yet. We can't run on rhetoric." He nodded. "Fair question." He clicked the remote, and the screen behind him lit up with a presentation titled The Bridge Initiative. "The plan is simple," he began. "We restructure Skybridge's culture from the inside out. Mandatory bias and empathy training for all staff, real-time accountability systems, body cams for onboard service disputes, independent ethics teams to review passenger complaints. Every employee will have a performance metric tied not only to efficiency, but to dignity." A murmur spread through the room. Langford scoffed. "Body cams, accountability teams. What are you trying to do, turn flight attendants into police?" "No," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm turning them into professionals accountable to the same standards they expect from passengers. Fairness works both ways," Layla added. "There will also be an anonymous reporting portal for employees who witness misconduct, and every bias claim will be logged, not buried." Caldwell frowned. "And what's the cost of all this?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Less than the cost of another lawsuit or another life humiliated at 30,000 feet." Langford slammed his pen down. "This isn't sustainable. You can't moralize a company into profit." Marcus met his eyes. "Watch me." The boardroom fell silent. By afternoon, the markets began to swing wildly. News anchors dissected his every word. Investors speculated about his next move, and social media divided into camps. Some called him a visionary, others a tyrant. But the story kept spreading, and for Marcus, that was enough. Visibility was the first step toward change. That evening, he met Nora Alvarez in a quiet bar on the Lower East Side. The place was dimly lit, the air heavy with the smell of whiskey and rain. She sat at the corner table, laptop open, fingers tapping furiously across the keys. "I've been waiting for this all day," she said as he sat down. "You've basically rewritten the playbook for corporate accountability." He chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it." "Do you realize how much backlash you're getting from the old guard?" she said, her tone half admiration, half warning. "Executives across industries are calling you dangerous." He leaned back. "Then I'm doing something right." Nora studied him. "You're calm. Too calm. Most people would be panicking right now." "I've lived through storms before," Marcus said quietly. "The trick isn't avoiding the rain. It's learning how to build in it." She smiled. "That's going in the article." He laughed softly. "Of course it is." As they talked, Nora's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then frowned. "You might want to see this." She turned the phone toward him. A leaked email was circulating online, an internal message from a Skybridge executive blaming Marcus for sabotaging shareholder value and threatening to sue. Marcus read it slowly. Langford, he murmured. Can you prove it's him? Nora asked. Layla's text popped up on his phone seconds later. We can trace it. It's his signature timestamp. Marcus looked up at Nora. Proof enough. Are you going to expose him? She asked. He hesitated. Not yet. Let him show his hand fully. The next morning, Skybridge stock dipped 12%. Panic rippled through the press. Langford seized the moment, holding a press conference of his own. Standing before cameras, he accused Marcus of reckless governance and turning corporate responsibility into theater. Marcus watched the broadcast from his office, silent. When it ended, Layla looked at him. He's baiting you. I know. Are you going to respond? Yes, Marcus said, standing, but not with words. He walked to the window overlooking the city. Prepare the documents. Tomorrow, we announce a full audit, every department, every dollar, every executive decision for the last 5 years. Transparency starts today. Layla nodded. That's going to shake the whole industry. Good, Marcus said quietly. It's about time someone did. The audit announcement dropped like thunder. The following day, Skybridge's internal files began surfacing financial irregularities, hidden settlements, unreported incidents of discrimination. Journalists pounced. Lawmakers started asking questions. For the first time, the board was silent. Even Langford looked uneasy. By nightfall, the story had gone global. Hashtags like Junefly and the Bridge Initiative trended across social platforms. Strangers shared their stories. People of color, single mothers, elderly passengers, all recalling moments of subtle or blatant bias they'd endured. Marcus read them quietly from his office, feeling the enormity of it settle over him. This was no longer his story alone. It was everyone's. Then his phone buzzed again. A message from Langford. You think you've won, but you've only lit the fuse. Be ready for the fallout. Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he smiled. He replied with just 2 words. I am. That night, the rain returned, soft but steady against the glass. Marcus sat by the window. Naomi's drawing framed on his desk. The bridge in her picture seemed to glow faintly under the lamplight. For the first time, he allowed himself to breathe not in victory, but in gratitude. He whispered into the quiet. Every storm has a purpose. The following week felt like a drum roll that never stopped. The media couldn't look away. Investors couldn't predict a thing. And the old guard of Skybridge Airlines was beginning to fracture under the pressure. The audit Marcus Ellington had ordered had unearthed far more than even he had expected years of cover-ups, coded directives, and compensation packages used to silence employees who dared to speak out. Each revelation was another crack in the armor of a company once thought untouchable. Inside the top floor of Skybridge's headquarters, the air felt tense, charged. Marcus sat at the long conference table, flanked by Layla Carter and Caleb Owens. Across from them, the remaining board members sat uneasily, papers spread out before them, avoiding his gaze. Layla broke the silence first. The independent auditors found 78 instances of concealed settlements tied to discrimination cases in the last decade. 78. That's not oversight, that's design. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice low but commanding, and it ends today. Susan Caldwell cleared her throat softly. You've made your point, Mr. Ellington. No one here is defending what happened, but we can't rebuild this company if we burn it to the ground in the process. He met her gaze evenly. You can't rebuild anything without first clearing out the rot. David Langford's chair was empty, though his shadow still hung over every conversation. Since his resignation 2 days earlier, rumors swirled that he was preparing legal action or even attempting to rally shareholders to reverse Marcus's control. But Marcus wasn't worried. The truth was a weight even Langford couldn't lift. Caleb scrolled through a presentation on his tablet, projecting numbers on the wall. We've had 2 consecutive days of stock decline, but our customer sentiment index is up 23%. People are paying attention. Marcus, they believe in what you're doing. Marcus nodded. Then let's give them something to believe in, long term. He looked around the room, pausing for a moment. I'm establishing a permanent division inside Skybridge and Equity and Ethics Council. It won't just oversee complaints. It will have veto power on company policies that affect passengers and employees. Every executive bonus will now include a metric tied to inclusivity and human-centered service. Caldwell looked skeptical. That's a radical move. It's a necessary one, Layla said, because radical is just another word for overdue. Marcus stood, walking toward the window. The city stretched below him, endless and bright. For too long, people in power believed dignity was optional, as if humanity could be a line item on a spreadsheet. That changes now. He turned back to face them. I want our company to be the first in aviation history to make fairness measurable. Because if you can measure it, you can hold it accountable. The boardroom fell quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. It wasn't resistance, it was consideration. Even skepticism was beginning to soften into respect. After the meeting, Marcus lingered alone in the office. The sunset bled through the glass, casting long amber streaks across the room. His phone buzzed. It was Nora Alvarez. "Marcus," she said, her voice buzzing with energy. "You're not going to believe this. A former Skybridge employee, someone from Langford's old team, just sent me a file. It's explosive." "What kind of file?" "Emails. From Langford to senior staff. He explicitly told them to maintain the premium image of first-class seating by avoiding visual inconsistencies that may discomfort high-tier clientele." Marcus. He wrote those words. There's no interpretation needed. He was silent for a long moment. Forward it to Layla. Already did. "But Marcus, this is going to destroy him." "Good," Marcus said quietly, "but it's not about him anymore. It's about everyone who was told they were too different to belong." He hung up, leaning back in his chair. The city lights outside flickered to life one by one. For the first time, he allowed himself a small smile. This was no longer just a corporate battle. It had become a cultural shift, one he intended to see through. The next day, Layla and Caleb joined him for an emergency press conference. The Skybridge logo shone behind them, but beneath it was a new slogan. Unveiled that morning, "The bridge belongs to everyone." When Marcus stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. Cameras flashed, but his focus remained steady. 10 days ago, he began. "I sat in one of our first-class cabins and was told to move because I didn't fit the image of who belonged there. That moment was not an accident. It was a reflection of a system that has, for too long, prioritized comfort over conscience. But systems can change. People can change. And today, we begin." He gestured to the new logo projected behind him. "Skybridge will now operate under a new framework, the Bridge Initiative. Every action we take, Every policy we write, every person we serve will be held to one standard dignity. A hand shot up from the crowd. Mr. Ellington, your critics say this is all performative, that it's about optics, not impact. How do you respond? Marcus smiled faintly. When change threatens comfort, people call it performance. But the truth doesn't need applause, it just needs consistency. Ask me again in a year, and I'll show you numbers that prove empathy can drive profit. The next question came from another journalist. What about former Chairman Langford's involvement in these scandals? There are rumors of leaked emails. Marcus met her eyes. Those emails speak for themselves. We won't engage in personal attacks, but we will engage in accountability. That answer rippled across the airwaves. Within hours, the leaked documents were public. Langford's reputation collapsed overnight. Networks aired the story repeatedly, calling it the flight that changed everything. Meanwhile, Skybridge's customer engagement exploded. Thousands of passengers shared messages of support online, recounting how Marcus's reforms made them feel seen for the first time. Hashtags like "Do We Belong Here" and "The Bridge is Open" trended worldwide, but success didn't come without resistance. Anonymous threats began appearing in Marcus's inbox. Former investors accused him of weaponizing identity for profit. Late-night pundits mocked him for turning airlines into therapy sessions. Yet, beneath the noise, something fundamental was shifting. That evening, Marcus sat in his office again, exhausted but resolute. Nora stopped by unannounced, holding her tablet. "You're trending in 40 countries," she said, smiling. "You've started a global conversation." He chuckled softly. "Then let's make sure it ends in action." She hesitated, then said quietly, "You know, there's a story forming here not just about business or bias, but about what happens when someone refuses to stay quiet. It's going to outlive you." Marcus smiled, eyes distant. "Good. Then it's worth every scar." Before leaving, Nora paused by the door. "You've made enemies, Marcus." He nodded. "Then I must be making progress." When the building emptied that night, Marcus walked down to the hangar, where one of Skybridge's jets sat gleaming under the floodlights. It was the same model he had flown on the day everything began. He placed a hand on its cool metal surface, whispering to himself, "You were the start of something bigger than humiliation." He thought of Naomi asleep at home, her bridge drawing framed on his desk, and he felt a rare swell of peace. He didn't just want to own a company, he wanted to rewrite the story of belonging itself. As he stood there, the night air humming around him, he realized that the real power of justice wasn't loud or vengeful. It was quiet, methodical, and deeply human. The kind that builds rather than breaks. The kind that heals rather than humiliates. And, for the first time, he believed that the bridge he was building might actually hold. The days following the press conference were a blur of movement, noise, and scrutiny. Marcus Ellington's name had become both a beacon and a target. Investors praised his courage in redefining corporate accountability. But power brokers in the aviation industry whispered behind closed doors, plotting ways to undermine him. The reforms he'd set in motion were irreversible now, yet the resistance was growing in silence, gathering force like a storm brewing at high altitude. It was nearly midnight when Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID Layla Carter. Her voice came through steady but urgent. "Marcus, We've got a problem." He sat up in bed, eyes alert. "What kind of problem? Langford just filed a motion for injunction. He's claiming your acquisition was based on insider manipulation and non-transparent holdings through proxy accounts." Marcus frowned. "That's absurd. Every transaction was clean." "I know," Layla said, "but he's got influence. He's pulled strings with people at the Commerce Oversight Board. If they agree to an investigation, your reforms freeze until it's resolved." For a long moment, he didn't respond. The shadows in the room stretched across his face like dark wings. "How long do we have before it goes public by morning?" she said. He exhaled slowly, looking toward Naomi's closed bedroom door down the hall. "All right. Prepare a statement. I'll handle Langford myself." After the call, he stood by the window, staring at the city lights glittering below. For the first time in weeks, doubt crept in, the quiet kind that whispers just loud enough to be heard. He wasn't afraid of losing money or reputation. He was afraid that his vision, the one Naomi believed in so fiercely, would be buried beneath corporate politics before it could even take root. By dawn, headlines had already exploded across every major outlet. Langford accuses Ellington of corporate misconduct. The bridge initiative under fire. Reporters camped outside his building, their cameras waiting for a reaction. Marcus ignored them, arriving at the Skybridge headquarters through a side entrance. In the boardroom, Layla and Caleb were already waiting. Layla had dark circles under her eyes from working through the night. Caleb's tie was loosened, his expression grim. Layla slid a folder toward Marcus. "Langford's claim is built around your use of shell holdings during the acquisition. Technically legal, but he's arguing it was deceptive because it hid your identity until after control was achieved." Marcus opened the folder, scanning the documents. "It's strategy, not deception. Everyone in this room knows that's how major acquisitions happen." Caleb nodded. "He's just trying to weaponize optics. If the board starts panicking, he'll have an opening." Marcus looked up. "Then we don't give him one." Layla hesitated. "There's something else." What she exchanged a glance with Caleb before speaking. "Someone from inside has been leaking internal communications, not just press releases, private memos, policy drafts, even parts of your emails." He froze. "From inside. Yes. We traced the IP logs. Someone on the executive floor." The realization hit like turbulence. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, trying to calm the pulse rising in his temples. "Find out who," he said quietly. While Layla handled the legal side, Caleb managed investor calls, trying to stabilize confidence. The hours blurred into one another. By mid-afternoon, the tension was palpable. Marcus stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the clouds gather over the skyline. A storm was rolling in real this time, not metaphorical. Then his phone buzzed again. It was Nora Alvarez. "I just got a tip," she said breathlessly. "Langford's meeting with a financial reporter in half an hour. He's planning to release falsified documents showing you funneled company money into personal accounts." Marcus's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. "We can disprove it." "You can. But by the time you do, the damage might already be done." Nora warned. "He's going for headlines, not truth." He smiled faintly. "Then we'll give him a better one. Meaning, I'm done reacting. It's time to act." He ended the call and turned to Layla and Caleb. "Get everyone to the auditorium, all staff, all departments, in 1 hour." Layla blinked. "You're holding a company-wide meeting. Now, yes, he said. If they're going to hear a story, it'll be from me. An hour later, the Skybridge Auditorium was packed, hundreds of employees seated in rows, whispers echoing like wind through the space. Cameras streamed live to every branch office worldwide. When Marcus walked onto the stage, the murmurs stopped. He didn't use a teleprompter. He didn't carry notes. He stood in the center of the stage, hands clasped, voice clear. Some of you may have heard the rumors that our reforms are collapsing, that what we're building is an illusion. I'm here to tell you none of that is true. He paused, letting the silence deepen. Yes, there's resistance. There always is when you challenge something old. The question is, will we let fear decide what kind of company we want to be? Or will we keep building the bridge we promised the room was utterly still? Skybridge isn't just an airline anymore, he continued. It's a reflection of who we are as people. We have a chance to prove that fairness isn't a weakness, it's a strategy. That empathy can be as powerful as efficiency, and that dignity, once given freely, pays back more than any dividend ever could. He took a step closer to the front row. I didn't buy this company to win. I bought it because losing my dignity at 30,000 feet taught me something no title, no wealth, no status means a thing if you have to earn your humanity twice. I will not let anyone else go through that, not while I can stop it. For a heartbeat, the crowd remained silent. Then, slowly, applause began soft at first, then rising until it filled the room like a wave. People stood, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. Even those who had doubted him felt something shift. Backstage. Layla exhaled. That was something else. Caleb grinned. You just turned a scandal into a rally. But Marcus wasn't celebrating. His mind was already elsewhere. We still have a leak, he said quietly. Late that evening, while the city thundered under sheets of rain, Marcus sat alone in his office, reviewing network logs. Then he saw a pattern hidden in the data. The source of the leaks wasn't an external hacker. It was someone with internal clearance, Susan Caldwell. He stared at the screen, disbelief mixing with disappointment. She had been cautious, even skeptical, but he had thought she was beginning to believe in the mission. Why betray it now? Layla entered quietly, reading his expression. You found it. He nodded. Susan, do you want to confront her? He didn't answer for a moment. No, not yet. Tomorrow, we'll give her the chance to explain herself. As Layla left, Marcus leaned back, staring at Naomi's framed drawing again. The open bridge she'd sketched now seemed symbolic of everything he was fighting for, and everything that could fall apart if trust broke from within. Thunder rumbled outside, low and steady, like the heartbeat of a waiting storm, Marcus whispered to himself. Every bridge faces wind before it stands. He knew tomorrow would bring the hardest choice yet, not about money or control, but about forgiveness. Morning sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the Skybridge headquarters, casting long lines of gold across the polished floor. The storm that had raged for days both outside and inside the company was finally settling, but the air still carried the echo of tension. Marcus Ellington sat at the head of the conference table, his expression calm yet unreadable. Across from him sat Susan Caldwell, the board member revealed as the internal leak. Layla Carter and Caleb Owen stood nearby, silent witnesses to what everyone knew would be a turning point. Susan's eyes were weary, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. Marcus, I didn't do it to hurt you. she began quietly. "I thought if Langford exposed you first, the company would crumble. I leaked selective information to control the narrative. I thought I was protecting Skybridge." Marcus didn't interrupt. He let her words hang in the air, then he said softly, "And who protects the truth?" "Susan." Her gaze dropped to the table. "I made a mistake." He studied her for a long moment. "No," he said finally, "you made a choice, one born of fear, not malice, but the consequence is the same. You broke trust. The question now is what you'll do to rebuild it." Layla glanced at Marcus, surprised. "You're not removing her from the board." "Not yet," he said. "If we rebuild this company on punishment alone, we'll only repeat the cycle that broke it." He turned back to Susan. "You'll stay. But from today on, you work directly under Layla. Every document, every decision goes through her first. You'll help design the new ethics system you once undermined. That's your redemption path if you choose to take it." Susan nodded slowly, tears brimming. "I'll earn it." When she left the room, Layla turned to Marcus. "That was generous." He smiled faintly. It wasn't generosity, it was strategy. Real reform doesn't just fire people, it transforms them. Caleb exhaled. "You've changed the way this entire company thinks." "Marcus." "Not yet," Marcus said quietly. "But maybe we've started." Hours later, as the day faded into dusk, Marcus drove to the airport hangar. A new Skybridge jet stood gleaming under the floodlights. Its body bore the rebranded logo, a minimalist open bridge with the tagline underneath. "The bridge belongs to everyone." Employees had gathered nearby for the unveiling. Flight attendants, pilots, engineers, and even janitorial staff stood shoulder to shoulder, watching as Marcus approached the podium. Cameras rolled, but for once, he wasn't thinking about optics or sound bites. He was thinking about that first humiliating flight the moment he was told to move. The pain of that memory still lingered, but it had transformed into something far greater than anger. He began to speak, his voice steady and resonant. "A bridge," he said, "isn't built to separate people. It's built to connect them. And every connection needs strength. Strength not from steel, but from understanding." He looked across the crowd, meeting the eyes of people from every background, every role. We can't undo the past, but we can decide what we carry forward. Today, we carry dignity. The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to truly feel the weight of what had changed. Layla stood beside him, whispering, "They believe in it now. They believe in themselves." Marcus replied, "That's the point." As the celebration continued, Nora Alvarez arrived, camera in hand. She caught his eye, smiling warmly. "So, Mr. Ellington," she said, approaching him, "how does it feel to have turned humiliation into history?" He chuckled softly. "It feels lighter. You know, people are calling this the Ellington effect," she said, raising her brow, "a movement toward corporate empathy. You're trending again." He grinned. "If empathy's trending, I can live with that." Nora laughed. "I'm writing my final piece about you tonight. What do you want the headline to say?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Don't make it about me. Make it about the bridge." She smiled, understanding. "Then I'll call it The Bridge That Stood for Everyone." Later that evening, Marcus returned home. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the city beyond the window. Naomi was sitting on the couch, watching the live coverage of the event. When she saw him, Her face lit up. "Daddy, I saw your speech." Everyone clapped so loud he smiled, kneeling beside her. "Did it make sense to you?" She nodded eagerly. "You said everyone deserves a seat, even if people don't like them." "That's right," he said gently, "because fairness isn't about who looks like they belong. It's about who is human enough to deserve it." Naomi leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I think you made a lot of people happy." "I hope so," he whispered. "That's all I wanted." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "Can we go on a plane again? This time with your company." He laughed. "Yes, sweetheart. This time we'll fly together, and no one will ever tell us we don't belong." The next morning, Marcus's face was once again on every screen, but this time the headlines were different. "A new era of air travel begins." Skybridge sets global standard for equality, from humiliation to hope. The bridge that changed aviation. Airlines across the country began adopting similar reforms. The Department of Transportation issued new fairness guidelines modeled after Marcus's bridge initiative. What had started as a moment of injustice had become a movement for change. Weeks later, Marcus stood again at the airport, this time with Naomi holding his hand. They were boarding the inaugural flight of Skybridge under its new charter. As they stepped into the cabin, the flight attendant smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Ellington, Ms. Ellington. Your seats are ready." They walked to 1A and 1B front row, the same spot where everything began. Naomi pressed her face to the window as the engines hummed to life. "Dad," she said softly, "this is your bridge, isn't it?" Marcus smiled, looking out at the horizon. "No," he said, "it's our bridge." As the plane lifted into the sky, the city below shimmered like a mosaic of stories, each one connected by the invisible lines of compassion and courage. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, feeling peace settle over him. For the first time in his life, the air felt light. The story of Marcus Ellington reminds us that dignity isn't something we earn from others. It's something we must never surrender. Every act of bias, every quiet injustice is a test of what kind of world we want to build. Marcus's journey shows that real power doesn't come from control or retaliation. It comes from courage guided by empathy. For older audiences, this story carries an enduring truth. It is never too late to stand up for fairness. Systems change when individuals choose to act with conscience instead of comfort. We may not all own companies or make headlines, but we each hold influence in our homes, our workplaces, and our daily choices. The bridge Marcus built is not just a company. It's a symbol of connection, of healing across divisions. It asks us to look beyond fear and prejudice and to build something better, one decision at a time, because justice, at its heart, is simply love translated into action. Thank you for watching and walking this journey with us. If Marcus's story moved you, share it, because stories like this remind us of who we can be when courage meets compassion. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more real, powerful stories that speak to the heart. Together, we can keep building bridges where the world once built walls.